Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
It'd be nice to have three of us here so that if you have questions, we all kind of have different perspectives on things. And so I'll go first just to tell a little bit about what's been happening recently in my world with the city council. A few weeks ago, we had a budget working session. And I put it on Facebook, and if you're not on my Facebook page, please, you friend me or look in on it. I try to post things that are happening with city government. But I put it out there, what is important to you as citizens for the budget? And I also had some things personally that I think are important. And so we had a, oh, do you want to, I'm Theresa Stehly. And Brekke.
And I thought that wasn't for me. No. I'm Pat Starr. I represent the northeast part of Sioux Falls, but once you're on the council, I get to represent the entire city. So, thank you.
So one of the things we just did, and I've got sheets if you'd like to see this. If you're happy, I'm happy to pass these out. But we met and we talked about what the citizens might want to see within the budget. Because the way the process has worked, I've been on this council for 3 years now, is the way it's worked is that the mayor's office and his department heads put together their budget. They bring it to us in the summer, present what they've put together, and when it's all said and done, then we have the opportunity to dismantle it if we want to, or to interject things that are important to us. And I will tell you, once that budget is put together, it's like taking a little plastic knife and trying to cut into concrete. You just can't move it. So I thought, let's get ahead of this year and put some priorities forth, just so they can think about it. Nothing mandating that they do this, but I just thought that was a good energy. And at the top of our list is street repair. We all voted, 8 of us participated, and the triage center was up there, renovate and repair Frank Olson Park, put energy in the State Theater, Discovery District, affordable housing. So you can look at the list, and we sent it out and we said, list your top 10 priorities out of this brainstorming thing that we did. So I have that. And also I have copies of the Stehly report. This was the one that was recently in the shopping news. I'm putting this in the first week of every month. So this is a copy of the one that was just in the shopping news, and I had 2 guest citizens write. And if you ever have something you'd like covered in there, please let me know. And then I also mailed out these to residents last month, and Councilor Brekke and Starr each have articles talking about transparency issues. So if you didn't get a copy of this, I've got extra copies of that as well. But it's, to me, part of my mission is to help connect you to the issues and help you be able to be represented in the process.
By the way, you should mention that this is no cost to the city. This is
no, I paid for this personally. All of this is, my own money is used for this. So that's a little bit, and then I want to talk about the B ordinance here, but I'll let Janet Brekke put in her 2 cents here.
I'm Janet Brekke, and I'm a city council member at large, so I had to run a citywide race, and so I, represent the whole city. But Pat's right, once we're on board, we're all representing the whole city. The things I want to talk to you about today, basically in the almost 12 months, clearly May, when we took our oath of office. What I've spent my time doing is, and I talked to you about it, I've spent a lot of time, and I'm spending a lot of time currently trying to make some improvements on the transparency side, trying to tweak the structure, the government structure that I think has been kind of eroded over time. And so I'm working on those. It's been difficult because there's a lot of people on the council who don't think there's not a problem, and they don't understand like I do, because I was so deep into the implementation of this government in the first place, how these things will help that reputation that we have of not being transparent. So I'm working on those, and then aside from that, because that's really been hard work for me. It's been hard to try to get people to buy into these changes. So in order to keep myself positive, there's two other things that I'm working on very diligently now, and one is it's a national Veterans Advocacy Initiative, which I'll speak in a little more detail to you about. I'm actually working with our congressman and the National League of Cities and the National Veterans Intermediary in order to deliver services better to our veterans. And I'll talk a little more detail about that. And then also I've been working hard. I talked to you folks about 3 programs I wanted to do. One was about fluent English, one was improving the neighborhoods, and one was trying to deal with the mental health addiction issue. The one I'm focusing on initially is the fluent English one. I've got about 16 organizations that are all doing their own thing, that are willing to work with me to try to take a more comprehensive approach at how we're doing that. And this would be geared towards dealing with the adult diverse community. And I think the children are being picked up pretty well in the various things that are in place, but we're forgetting to deal with the adults, and I think it's really important, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. So that's kind of what my agenda is going to be today.
Well, thank you for having me back. We must have done okay the last time we were here, but I know the last time that I was in this room for a Kiwanis meeting, and I gave them, I thought, some really good-natured ribbing about their singing, and I have paid the price ever since. So I'm not going to mention the quality of the singing that was here today. So I'm smarter than that. I do, well, I'm not necessarily smarter, but I do learn from some of those mistakes by the time they're done. So I will not bring that up. But thank you again for having us today. It's always fun. This group has some of the best questions, probably some of the toughest questions, I'll bet, by the time we're done. But this is Sioux Falls in this room. This is the people that I feel like I represent most, that just work hard, have made a living here, have raised their kids here, and doing those type of things. And that's what really guides me in a lot of the things that I do. I have 3 kids that I want to be able to have a future here in Sioux Falls. I said that when I first ran, and I continue to say it every day. What do I do? What we do influences their ability to be part of this community that I love so much. And sometimes that comes across negative, but I'll tell you what, my job's to squeeze every nickel, to try to point out how important open and transparent government is. We just saw it with the task force that's looking at the event center. And that group meeting behind closed doors, both Councilor Stehly and I were pretty vocal about when our leaders say sometimes you just have to do these things behind closed doors to get things done. That's not the type of government that I want to represent. And sometimes, you can change that by just pointing out that it's not right, and sometimes you have to embarrass and poke a little bit, and it takes a resolution. But I think we'll get a much better product out of what we're doing with the convention center and in that area. It's the same with other things that are going forward, whether it's TIFs and different projects of how we spend the state. I can really say I've been, Councilor Brekke's really made me a convert to this, a long-range planning process. We have a $460 million enterprise that's the city of Sioux Falls with no long-term plan, no strategic plan. Each one of our departments have their silo of plans of where they're headed and where they're going. We've watched the school district do a good job of sitting down and saying, okay, here's what our needs are, here's where we're headed. This week makes me doubt that a little bit of where they're headed. But they spent the time as a school board with the superintendent to come up with a plan of where they're going forward. And we have a part of that as a city, but we don't have an overall master plan of where we're headed. And we all know that planning is such an important part of where we want to be. We get caught up in the pothole issues of today, and we do the smaller things of what's going on in government and getting through each day. But again, where are my kids going to be in 20 years? Where are my grandkids going to be in 40 years? And some of the success that we've had in Sioux Falls is because those plans were put in place and the things that were done 20 and 30 years ago. And when I leave this office, I want to make sure that we can look back, and I shouldn't, I do this, but I use this all the time. When I'm at Dalromo chewing on my Jell-O, I want to be able to look back and say, we put those things in place. We don't know how we got here, but we put those things in place 20 years ago. And really, that's been my focus for the last couple of years, and it'll continue to be the focus moving forward of making sure that we have a good city. So I promised 5 minutes, and I'm sure I'm way over that. So you lead us into where you want to head us next. So thank you.
Well, and piggybacking off of what Councilor Starr just said about that task force or study group that was closed, we did bring a resolution forward we can't mandate it, but we requested that they open that up. And as that was being kind of emerging, then the task force took it upon themselves to vote that they were going to open it up. So I think there was a cause and effect thing involved. But just for your records, and I've got it on here, but mark your calendar, the next task force meeting is going to be held at the Convention Center April 24th at 8:30 in the morning. And it is, I went and sat through this 3-hour meeting a week ago. They had 4 chairs for the citizens. One of them, the media was sitting in. One of them had the business manager from SMG, I believe she was. So there were 2 chairs for the people to sit in. I stood for the meeting. And Bruce Danielson, who was here 2 months ago, bless this guy's heart. That's his camera right over there, right? Bruce shows up and videotapes the whole thing. So had he not been there, there would be no documentation of the discussion that was had. So we need people to show up and to listen to this because they're all facilities that are supported with our tax money. So I'm really grateful that it is open, and I hope that we're going to be setting a precedence moving forward that that's the way we do business in Sioux Falls. We let the sunshine and the citizens into the process.
I have to jump in. I'm sorry, because you want me to do that? We talk about openness and transparency, but having a public meeting at 8:30 on a Wednesday morning that takes up 3 hours, I'm not sure that we were as successful of being transparent as we wanted to. We also had another citizens meeting that was this week, or was it yesterday? The transportation one, where you had to pre-register to go to it. And so, we've got a ways to go. I want to say that we've been successful and we're allowing people to be there. Now we just make it uncomfortable for you to be there. And so maybe the next step is getting to that point where you don't have to stand for 3 hours to listen to one of the meetings. But I promised to be positive today. So I was going to share the good things. So, and opening that up is a good thing because what happens is it's kind of like the parking ramp that we're building downtown. Behind the scenes, the bureaucrats talk about it. There's lots of meetings with the builders and all the stuff. And then we plop it on the community and say it's going to be 20 million. And then we can't figure out why people are opposed to it or have other ideas. So I'm really hoping with the convention center task force that we're brought along as a community and understand what the needs are there. The arena's been around since the 60s and have the same bench seats in a lot of places. In the 50s, see, I don't want to be as old as I am. But their original seating, the building's tired. There are some things, whether we end up knocking it down and building a hotel or doing whatever we do, the community's got to be involved in that process so that it doesn't become so adversarial. You've got to be part of the process to understand how we got there. And by going behind closed doors to make those decisions isn't the way to involve the community. So.
And Councilor Starr, if you just, I also want him to mention his effort to bring how we are elected to a public vote. Would you just give a little history of it? Brekke initially brought something forward, and Starr was the last effort on this. Would you just tell him about what that was about?
Well, one of the things that this charter's done, or where we changed it, is that if a number of people run, say 5 or 6 people run for the city council, you have to get a third, or 34% of the vote is how it's always been since the beginning of the charter. It wasn't the original intent of the charter. They didn't want to have any minimum.
That's not the charter, it's the ordinance.
It's the ordinance
that's... make a distinction, it's not in the ordinance. The ordinance just says the city council will decide how it's elected, basically. And then you have to, then the city council is tasked with putting into ordinance the process. But the process that's been in place has been in place since its inception.
Yep. And so it makes sense that if you have 6 or 10 people run, that you should have to get 34%, a minimum amount, so that you don't have to have a run, or before you have a runoff. So if you don't get 34%, then the top 2 get a change. Well, we try to mimic all of the state election laws for city council races, so it makes it easier for people to understand the process of how to run. Well, we had some cleanup things that the state made, and on second reading, one of the councilors said, no, you know, we need to have 50% of the vote, or we'll have to have a runoff. Well, that makes a significant difference in what it takes to have a runoff. It's expensive. I know that we talked earlier about what it costs to run and the effort that it takes, but you spend months away from your family, you get out knocking on doors, all really good things, but then you get to the end and all of a sudden you have a runoff 3 weeks later. And then it really gives an advantage to an incumbent, someone who can raise money or write a check themselves to do that. But in my case, in a district race, I would say it would take another $6,000 to $8,000 to $10,000 that you have to raise in that 3-week period to do it. So it makes the races longer. It makes them more expensive. It just makes it a lot more time away from family for a part-time job. So we've tried to go back a couple of times and move it back to that 34%, but the rest of the council didn't feel as strongly as we did that it really raises the bar of what it takes to do it. Councilor Neitzer had a good point that, you know, in the mayor's race, if we get a bad mayor, it can really affect the long term. If some grassroots person gets elected that isn't the favored person of the chamber and the developers of town, it's probably not going to ruin the city and the council. So having that minimum bar there that you have to get basically a third of the vote or 34% makes a lot more sense. But we didn't get that change so currently it's going to still be at that additional, you have to get 50% of the vote. That will, again, make the races longer, it'll make them more expensive, and you'll get more people knocking on your doors at least. So.
Well, and I would just pipe up, however, I kind of expected that. I brought that ordinance forward, and it's one of these things, these good government things I've been working on, and I kind of expected that to happen. And so I will be bringing it to the Charter Revision Commission, because I think that the way it's been bounced around and the motives for changing it and the processes that they used when they changed it and how it was done, clearly. No, let me finish. Clearly, no, I want the floor on this one. It clearly makes it known that the council's not able to deal with this issue appropriately itself. They can't deal with the fact, they shouldn't be deciding how to elect themselves because it's become political. So I'm going to be bringing it to the Charter Revision Commission and asking that it be put in the charter, how we elect ourselves. And it won't just be that choice. I'm bringing them all the choices. There's regular plurality, there's plurality at 34%, there's 50 plus 1%, and there's ranked choice voting. I'm going to bring the entire issue to the Charter Revision and ask them to make a recommendation. They're a recommending body. They would be recommending it to the public for a vote because it'll be a change to the charter. So that it's not done yet.
But the history of this is that we look for, I believe the last 20 years, it's been done with Tab Baker's here. I mean, all these people were elected. Pat Starr and I and Greg Neitzer all got elected with less than that 50% thing. No one in our community ever said there was a problem with how we're handling it. We use the same standard for our county commission, for the school district, the legislature. All of a sudden, a year and a half ago, Rex Ralphing came out of nowhere and said, oh, we've got to change this. Then we need a higher standard for people getting into the city council office. Kind of a slap in the face to those of us that are working very hard and I got 40, I think 6%. And so here's the deal. That got passed in the dark of the night, and immediately we tried to switch it back. And it was a 4-4 vote, and Huther broke the tie each time to keep it at 50%. So then Brekke comes on board, taking Rex Ralphing's place, and she tries to bring it forward, and Christine Erickson changes her vote and starts to vote that let's keep it at 50%. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to annihilate a grassroots candidate's ability to get elected. They're giving weight to people who can raise, as Councilor Starr said, the most money. So I'm appreciative of the efforts that we've had to try to change this thing. Now we're going to great lengths to go to the Charter Revision Commission because they changed something that wasn't broken. Maybe, I've never heard a citizen say there was a problem with how we elected people, or the people who actually were elected as a result of that. So I just wanted to say one more thing. Coming up, and I'm interested in feedback, but the three of us actually met a few months ago talking with the community who are interested in starting beehives, having a beehive in the backyard. This came to my attention because the Argus Leader reported that they are teaching classes on beekeeping in Sioux Falls, but it's illegal to keep bees in Sioux Falls. And I hadn't thought about it. As I'm an avid gardener, I love to have bees, and we're talking honeybees, not the wasps and the hornets. Although they're all allowed in our town, they can come over the border anytime they want. Okay, so
without their stinger?
there's no wall there yet. So anyway, I put it on Facebook and I got all of this response. I'd say 99% of it was positive, people saying we should allow for some aspect of this. And our legislative staff person researched different ordinances, and Councilor Brekke and I went to the garden club last week and presented it and heard comments. So this is going to be coming forth early this summer, I hope, to do this, to say, and we're interested in having some kind of parameters, so it's not like just a free-for-all that we have every house in a neighborhood has beehives. They did say, however, that it's an expensive endeavor, $700 to $1,000 to start this. So that in itself might put some limits as to how fluent this will be in our town. But that's kind of the thing coming up next for me. But now I'll let Brekke talk about whatever she wants to do. And how much time did you want for questions?
Once, whatever you want to allow. 15 minutes?
Okay, so you got 2
Yeah,
minutes.
we better go.
Okay, so you go next.
All right, well, no, I'm ready for questions. Well, I'm not sure I'm ready for questions from this group, but we should do. Yep, fire away. You want the mic, though, so everybody hears you? No, let's do it over here. He's okay? All right, fire away.
You got a big voice.
Yeah, affordable housing, high-paying jobs in the city, maybe use your construction workers that you can hire off the street to help build some potholes. Infrastructure on the streets, and who's gonna pay for my potholes for the alignment on my car?
That's easy. All right, so the first one that I was excited before I got over here today, pulled up my email. The Glory House is having a groundbreaking next week for their new facility. So there's a housing project for you that we were able to take some land that the city was sitting on and trying to speculate and figure out how we can make the most money on. And we actually turned it over to a group of people who are trying to turn their lives around. It always amazes me that you can be 2 weeks out of prison and Costco will put you behind a cash register. You can find a job, you just can't find a place to live. And with what the Glory House is going to start here, we're going to be able to help people. We've invested in them for chemical dependency. We've invested in mental health for them. We've taken them through the process. Now we're able to take them, I like to call it a 3/4 house, and that, it's that next step. It's the continuation of the services so that you're successful, so that you don't turn it around and then end up back in the same place where you got in trouble in the first place. So I'm proud of that one, so I'll give up the microphone, but I think that's a good process.
The pothole issue, Councilor Starr and I had an ordinance a few weeks ago to we've just found out that we have, in both the second penny fund and the first penny fund, we have 4 million plus excess dollars. And so he and I, we're hearing from people saying, we got a pothole problem, massive. We're hearing from the mayor saying, bring the employees donuts and send them thank you notes because they're so overworked. And to me, it made perfect sense to say, well, let's use a little of our excess money here to hire some extra workers. Whether it's giving the guys from the pen for $1.25 an hour a chance to come out and help. But I put that out there. It got voted down, that energy, and we were assured by the Public Works Department they got it in hand. But I have been hearing from people who have had damage, and KDLT reported that one service station had 10 tow-ins a day of people whose wheels were knocked off, or the alignment was broken, the what do you call that? Axle was broken, whatever it is. I've been saying to people, contact the mayor. He's in charge of risk management, and I think that the mayor of Omaha has a program where they're giving some money to help people with this. You have to validate it with that it was within this time frame. But yeah, we are responsible for good streets for our people. That's really the basic thing I hear from citizens.
We left you
Yes.
wages.
Okay.
Well, for this one's kind of a point counterpoint on this one. I didn't vote for it, but that was when I found out at the meeting that they have $8 million in the budget for street maintenance already. And so there's nothing to stop us from supplementing the budget later, but they've got plenty of budget right now to do that. And I do think, however, credit to these guys for bringing it forward is that it did light the fire in City Hall. Okay, let's really jump this up to a priority. The other thing is, you know, part of the pothole problem has to do with science, and there's a temperature issue. And so what they're able to put in there right now is called kind of a slurry mix, and it's kind of a temporary thing. So they put it in, it pops it right out, and the plants that provide this stuff don't open up till May. You know, over out at Merlin Roy's, that actually provide the stuff that actually adheres and stays in there. So they kind of have to do a temporary fix until they can open up these big plants, because they don't open those up until they can start executing all these contracts for all the road projects, because it's done on a grand scale. So, you know, then you'll see the permanent repair. So, I mean, at least at the moment, I think there's budget in place, but, you know, we may be going back later and making soothsayers out of these guys and having to supplement it because it was so bad this year. The other thing, and, you know, I can appreciate the desire to have the city pay for, you know, the damage that has been done to vehicles, but that's when the lawyer comes out at me and I go, listen, you know, it's an act of God. I mean, we had an incredibly tough winter, and, you know, once you open that door and the city starts paying things that it's not actually liable for, you just do it because you want to be a good guy. Where do you stop? So I have a little problem with that.
But quick, Jim, but I just want to say, people are raising the question as to the integrity of these streets when we're building them. So why, that's the question. I mean, you can say act of God, but if we're not putting quality workmanship into these to start with, then why are they, I mean, some streets were okay, other streets are blowing apart. So that's, I think we need to take a look at this. Jim?
This is because of South Dakota, and I urge you, we advertise, go to it, it's great. But I see where we're gonna get into another parking ramp down where the steel company is on Phillips. And this would be the largest TIF project in the history of Sioux Falls, maybe the state. I just got to ask, you know, and someone referred in an oblique sort of way to the school board, how much money, when the city basically gives a TIF, that means the county and the school district loses tax funding for about 10 years. Has anyone done a study on how much money has been lost to not only Sioux Falls, but the school district and also Minnehaha County because of TIFs? And why don't we give, and one last question, but it deals with TIFs, why don't we give TIFs to medium and lower income people who want to repair their houses and make them nice in existing areas, instead of giving huge sums of money to developers? But I think I know the answer, but I'll let you.
And let me say, just this morning I had a conversation with someone in the media, and they said, Theresa, why don't you find out what in the past, because we've just been involved with some of these high profile TIFs. Let's ask our city to come up with some evidence as to how these TIFs given in the past have actually paid off in the long run. What are we getting back from that? So I don't know that answer, but I'm with you, Jim. I say the same thing. I think the average citizens kind of are saying, you know, what the heck are we getting for our tax dollars? Project trim, we force you to trim your own trees in the boulevard. You know, we're going to give you kind of half-baked streets. We are doing some, we got the snow gates, that's a good thing. But yeah. But I'm committed to say, you know, I mean, we certainly have the downtown energy, And there are things within, there's 2 projects going on there that haven't really been given to the public yet. Watch my Facebook page. Scott Arisman at South Dakota does do, love him or hate him, that guy puts the agenda out there. He tries to educate people. He gets to have his own editorials in there. It's his page, but it's going to be interesting to move forward.
I would bet $1, and I don't gamble. There's one person in this city that knows exactly the effect of the TIFs, and it's the business manager of the school district, and he would probably be able to tell you immediately each one of them. So if you can't get it off the city folks, he's got that. Because when I was on the board, we knew, Dr. Harris made sure we knew every effect of everyone.
And I would just add, traditionally, in Sioux Falls and even in the state, cities have used TIFs, to spur economic development. That's a fact. However, I would say, also, this particular administration had actually raised the issue at an earlier information meeting about using TIFs to improve neighborhoods. And I pounced all over that. It was raised by Erica Beck, and I talked about it with her publicly, back and forth at some of these meetings, and I've talked to her privately about it. I really would like to see that happen. 2 of the things that I'm trying to focus on, as I call it, 2 circles. A circle around the core of the city, the downtown, and then a larger circle around the neighborhoods around downtown. At the same time that we're trying to explode downtown with all this opportunity, with the rail yard properties and what's going on with this, the biggest and best ever. While that's exciting, there's going to be a service sector that's going to work in those buildings. It's going to work in these new hotels. And what are we doing for them? That's the second circle. I really want to focus with this administration during this next decade on making sure that our neighborhoods, our core neighborhoods, our older neighborhoods, keep up with that vibrance that's going to happen downtown. And I'm getting very positive feedback from Erica Beck, who is really the person in charge of that, from the planning and zoning perspective. And she has talked about it, and I believe we're going to see it happen. You're going to see us use TIFs for the first time probably ever to actually help reinvigorate some of our older core neighborhoods. I hope.
Let me do 30, let me do 50 seconds. No, I won't do 30 seconds. Let me do a quick TIF thing for me. One of the things, and I think you know this, Melanie, is that schools are held kind of harmless in the TIF process because the state makes up that money. So it really puts a burden on the state as well. And the state is, Governor Dugard really looked at it and saying we're cutting back on the number of TIFs. And they tried to do some state things, and we cooled the jets of the legislature as municipalities and said, hey, let's kick that down the road for someone else to clean up. The other thing is, I'm a huge proponent of TIFs when that's what it takes to start that snowball on the edge of the cliff. When we have that opportunity that we have a blighted area that needs that kickstart to get it going. When we need to make that investment to start the project. The ones that I've voted on since I've been on the council and have voted against are the ones we've already made the public investment in. The Levitt Shell, cleaning up Falls Park, putting those things together where we don't need to kick the process started. And that's where I think that we've kind of started to, we may not be off the rails yet, but we're getting pretty close to it, that do the TIFs start a process that we can't get with private money? And so when you design a project that involves a TIF from the beginning, is a parking ramp like the one that's proposed for downtown a public investment in a place we should be paying for with tax money? They're going to build a parking ramp they're proposing for half the price that the city paid for building one with twice as many spots. So the cost per spots are going to be when private industry is doing it. So I want to keep going with questions. So otherwise I'll take the TIF thing for the rest of the day.
So in our household, there's a lot of discussion about the 2 things that really wreck government, and that's big money or dark money, and a lack of transparency. And Janet, I know one of the things you talked about was you're kind of working the edges of things, it sounds like. I mean, you're trying to get at some real fundamental things, but you're having to kind of come at it piecemeal. And it strikes me about the recordings, like Bruce did the recording of that meeting. Is there a way to make it so that every city meeting versus us having to relitigate this with Parks and Rec and relitigate it with this particular commissioner task force, is there a way to make it that they all have to be video recorded and archived? Is that possible?
And available.
Right, and available, publicly available.
You know, currently, you know, our guidance comes from two places, South Dakota law, the open meetings law, and our canons of ethics. Make it very, and that we're dealing, where we're having the debate is in the gray area. And that's what Theresa talked about. She said they don't have to do it because it was strictly an advisory committee to the mayor. But there's clear direction by an attorney general's opinion and, you know, South Dakota Municipal League memos that suggest that, you know, it should be our practice, you know, when in doubt, open it up, or unless there's some reason, you should always open everything up. So right now, a lot of those advisory groups are not considered, you know, technically having to comply with those laws. However, again, in our canons of ethics, it clearly states that as council members, our job is to, you know, as much as we can, do as much as we can in open and in public. So, you know, that's what we're trying to do. But, you know, the idea of mandating all those would require a state law, and I don't think I can see that anytime in the near future. But to try to change the atmosphere is, you know, to try to convince our fellow council members, you know, I said, be not afraid, it's actually a good thing. You know, why it's so terrifying that the public should be involved, I don't know, but it's become that way. And so, you know, I would quote Doc Farber, who was a kind of the political science guru down in Vermillion. You know, we once talked about changing government and how people generally don't change the way they do things just because there's a better way of doing things when it comes to government. They're nervous about it. They hang on to old practices really hard. It's, unless there's some sort of scandal or throw the rascals out or something like that, they'll just stay with some of the bad practice for the longest time. So, you know, little baby steps is what we're trying to do, and I'm getting tremendous support in my you know, efforts, you know, from Theresa and Pat on that. So.
Well, and we did, if you remember with the videotaping of the park board, we had, I think it was 5-3 vote to videotape, to open it, and the mayor vetoed it. So there is. Yeah, that was Uther, but see, here's the deal.
Because now they are videotaping those. I just think it's important. They're currently.
I think they're audio. I thought the audio tape was. I didn't think. I don't know if they're being. I think they're making the audio tape available. They're still moving around to different. The park board goes to all these different places where it's hard to videotape them. But the thing is, just because we voted two or 3 years ago and it went down, why can't we bring it back again? I mean, that's where I'm pumping these guys all the time. I say, let's do it again, you know. You don't give up easily. Yes, Melanie.
Say, by the way, Tom, I hate to do this. Could we have 15 minutes? If anyone wants to excuse themselves, do it. I know it's a time situation here. Could we go another 15 minutes? I have one question and one responder to the question, unless it's really imperative.
Have you heard the three of us? Are you really thinking that only one of us is going to get a chance at each question? No, it's fine if that's something you want to do.
Maybe the person could ask who they want to respond. How about that? You designate who you. Okay, Melanie.
Very quickly.
Phyllis, are you going? Go Phyllis first.
I just want to talk about affordable housing. Longtime mental health advocate, and we need affordable housing downtown. I emailed the innovation person about, it's called the Kelsey Housing Project, where you have like businesses and you have rich people and people who need subsidized, all living in the same place, you know, kind of like the real world. But I think the Sioux Steel place is the perfect place to get that started, because it's close to the bus station. Affordable housing needs to be where there's public transportation, not out at that Copper Place or whatever, you know, where there is no bus service, so.
And notice that the affordable housing in Minneapolis and St. Paul is done by ordinance, and that it must be mixed, and that if you are on the light rail line, every person who lives on the light rail line should be able to get on the light rail on a flat way to get there. So you get this many high income ones up in the sky, this many middle income, and this many for poor people. The problem in Sioux Falls is that no one can afford on their salaries to live here. And that is a matter of wages.
Could
Okay,
we-
you could talk about anything else. My rant is against the innovation technology guy who is taking over the world of the study of the transit program, okay, tells me, no, we don't need any input from people that have been making input for 16 or 17 or 18 years. The department heads are going to do it. In the empty part of the city hall, in this empty room, and we're doing this whole big project on our own time. And he invites me to come and see that room. I go to the PTAB board, and the city employee in charge of the transit department gives an entire, results of a very expensive consulting company for transportation, whole big results. And this other guy, Jason something, whatever his last name is, Reisdorfer or something. He sits there, okay, ignores the whole thing, and says, well, all 13 of us have been out on the buses asking people questions, and all the questions have already been answered in this very expensive contract that has already been paid for.
Could
The
we,
problem is
could
the
we,
bus system and the affordable housing and the wages.
could we please do 1 or 2 sentence questions? We'll do about 3 more questions, then we'll go around.
And all those grants.
The council people will stay a little bit and talk
Absolutely.
individually if you want to.
Go that way, Tim, behind you.
Let's do 2 or 3 quick questions, just questions, not comments.
He's having
We
a
got a
question,
question.
Tom.
I
Go
want to
ahead.
actually ask,
Program.
Mr. Starr, you said you were accepting the tips. And there was a question on the value of tips and how much you lose. The question I have is, it's kind of a dual set of questions here, is that when you give a tip, people just think about property taxes potentially being lost. But in reality, if there's a large amount of sales tax that comes in, that's good. And also, if you're starting with a property that's paying $20,000 a year in taxes now, and it's going to be paying $200,000 a year down the road, that's a big deal. But also, the adjacent properties, which now are not going to be delayed 10 or 20 years from saving that tax, they're going to be paying the taxes right away when they start building. So it seems to me that TIFs have to have a positive return, but it's not just on that one piece of property. It's the neighboring properties and the sales tax revenue that has to be considered as well.
Absolutely, and that's why I said it's that, what does the overall project do? Mayor Huther made a really good point on TIFs when they talked about TIFs out by the arena and the convention center and now the Denny or the Premier Center. And he said the citizens already put $115 million TIF out in that area and it should develop on its own. Is that the catalyst for development? Where does that catalyst come from? And the whole thing that I think a lot of us agree on in this room, we can do all the housing projects we want, but I've been trying to focus the other direction. If we pay people a living wage, then they can afford their own house. So we don't need that. I co-opt your question, by the way. It does, but I'll get back to the TIF part of it quickly. But TIFs have to be done right. The TIF with the one that the last one we just voted on with the Lloyd project, it was bringing in more, or the parking ramps, an even better example with the 15-story hotel. If we're going to do TIFs, we have to do it to bring in jobs that pay. We have plenty of entry-level jobs in Sioux Falls. We don't need to incentivize more hotel and retail to make things continue to grow. If we're going to do TIFs and do incentives, in my mind, it has to be out at the USD Discovery District, where we're bringing in SAB Biotherapeutics and Alumend, Averis spin-off of vessel replacement and repairs. Jobs in the biotech field that's average in that $65,000 to $70,000 a year rather than the $25,000 to $30,000. We've got to stop calling economic development bringing in low-paying jobs. At some point, we have to be choosy enough that we've gone past far enough that yes, we want to encourage retail development in downtown and in retail development in the mall and as the retail economy changes, but we don't have to incentivize it to make it to continue to grow, to hang on, to barely pay people so they can't support their families.
The 20-year plan, though, is the type of thing that's part of that question. Is who does the 20-year plan TIFs are probably part of that, but who should be doing
It's,
that?
it's part of the application process when we consider, and the way we've set up the TIF process goes through the mayor's office, and the mayor has to make that decision whether they bring it forward or not. So it's kind of preliminary with the Sioux Steel one that they haven't even made application yet, but they're trying to be as open and transparent as they can be and share as much of the details that they can and how the process will work. So I appreciate that part of them doing that, so.
This is for Janet. You mentioned, well, affordable housing, mental health, addiction, you know. I used to live at a transitional house that was on 8th of Minnesota years ago. And I know they're doing the Glory House, you know, that land was donated or whatever for those folks. What about affordable housing, 3/4 house for a person living with mental illness, like the transitional house we had before? You know, it was a residential home with bedrooms, you know, we paid rent, and it was close downtown, you know, where I could get the bus, you know, because I was waiting for disability. Will there ever be something like that instead of a stupid parking ramp for persons living with mental illness? You know what I mean? Is there ever going to be something like that, Bill?
Well, I do like how you tied the two together,
Yeah.
because it does go together. You know, dealing with our mental illness issues and our addiction issues, it ties into workforce development, it ties into affordable housing, it all ties together, so it's kind of circular. So which thing you approach first, you know, what do you approach first? And, you know, I think that there, certainly the opioid addiction problem and the, you know, the fentanyl issue is jump-started a lot of thinking about dealing, you know, with, again, the addiction problems, which often, like 79% of addicted people with addictions have mental health, co-concurrent mental health issues. Right. And the sooner we can tie those things together and start to fuel those, then the second thing is once you get these people in a recovery situation, then how do you provide the proper housing and transitional things to get them back out so they become that workforce of our future, so we reclaim these people's lives. And there are being discussions about that some of it revolves around the triage center doing a better job of identifying and channeling people for opportunities, you know, at getting rid of their addictions. And then, you know, then the housing issue becomes tied to that. And I think, and again, with the Glory House, I mean, I'm really excited about that project out there because there's an opportunity out there to kind of have a campus situation. And they have really good statistics, and part of it has to do with the science of addiction. They have a higher success rate at the Glory House than Hazelden, you know, is one of the premier, and it's because they take people on federal contract who have been in the pen for 1 to 3 years, and that is after 1 to 3 years of sobriety. That's the opportune time to actually have a good outcome, you know, an outcome on the treatment programming. So, I mean, the location of that and everything about that makes that a good place to kind of expand things. And so we're, you know, one of the things I wanted was to make sure that they kept a hold of that Merck property and didn't get rid of it, so that we might, you know, see even a bigger future for them out there. But I think it's at that point, it's a little further down the road, but it's at that point you start talking about, yes, the more and better transitional housing that you can, because part of the recovery piece is getting them out of the bad environment so they don't go back home, you know, and whether it be in an individual house or a group home, I think that's all on the table. It is certainly part of the bigger
For the
piece.
persons living with mental illness also, will there ever be a facility that large for, you know, I mean, the transitional house I lived at, there was like 12 people, you know, and then they, you know, broke it down and it's gone. Will there ever be a facility, do you think, for persons living with mental illness, the same kind of facility, is what my question, I guess, is. Like the Glory House is getting. Will there be a campus type? I know that there's one place, assisted living, but will there be a 3/4 house for the persons?
I hope so.
Okay.
I hope so, because we have, you know, when you think about what Avira McKinnon is doing,
Right.
I mean, they get that. They understand that mental health piece. And so I think there's opportunities in this particular city for things like that to happen, because they understand, again, that transitioning that needs to happen for that problem.
Thank you.
We're going to wrap this part up. We're not going to go 3 hours today.
We can't stand that long.
The council people will stay around a little while, so if you want to ask them some individual questions, feel free.
Thank you so much.
We need to give them a hand. the banquet sign-up sheet, make it